What's going on, YouTube, and welcome back to Goal Line Hockey. It's your boy Kevin Forte. Today we are going to be taking a look at Brock Nelson and why a lot of teams seem to be interested in Brock Nelson. Frank Seravalli has him listed as the top trade target right now going into the 2025 NHL trade deadline. And a lot of teams are definitely looking at him as a option as he is a pending unrestricted free agent this summer. His contract that he's coming off of is actually a pretty good deal. It was a 6-year deal, $6.5 million contract he signed back a few years ago, and now he is up for a new contract. And Brock Nelson's numbers for the Islanders, maybe not the most impressive when you think about it, but I think a lot of teams see the potential of what he can be for their team. And Brock Nelson has 13 goals this season. He's on pace for, if he goes to a good team, probably closer to 30 to 35 goals if he's able to get to a team fairly soon. He has 28 points this season in 46 games. And when you look at a guy like Brock Nelson, this is a guy, he's a former first-round pick back in 2010. He's played a lot of NHL games. He's hit 886 NHL games. And why a lot of these teams seem to be interested in him, he's from Warroad, Minnesota. So obviously, the Minnesota Wild are in on this chase, of course, for multiple reasons, and one of them being the fact he's from Minnesota. But Frank Seravalli came out with an interesting, a little take on a couple teams that seem to be linked to the Islanders center. So Seravalli said the Minnesota Wild, the Winnipeg Jets, the New Jersey Devils, the Boston Bruins, and the Carolina Hurricanes could be good fits for Brock Nelson. So his take is kind of something I like to do every once in a while. Like, they could be good fits. He didn't say they've been linked to this player, even though we have heard that about Minnesota Wild in the past. Minnesota has definitely been linked to Nelson for years. I remember even last year they talked about this. Like 4 or 5 years ago, they talked about this. This has been an ongoing thing. The Minnesota Wild, through different GMs and different regimes and eras, have always seemed to be interested in Brock Nelson. And it makes a lot of sense because when you look at the Minnesota Wilds, really for the longest time now, they have not been able to land a top 6 center. You remember the Tomas Hertl situation. They were trying to land Hertl a couple years ago. They tried landing a couple of other guys that have been on the market in the center market. They just haven't been able to get them. But Brock Nelson definitely seems like a guy that could be had for Minnesota this time. And when you look at his age, he's 33 years old. You're not probably signing. He's probably going to get, this is his last ticket in the NHL. Like, his big contract already came. And he's probably looking at something after this season, probably a 2 or 3 year deal. And probably not much further than that. Because then you get to 37, 38. And his speed isn't necessarily his friend. So you wonder how much longer he's going to play. So I don't see his next contract being something that's going to be a problem for somebody in the future. Maybe it is. Maybe they sign him to that big deal. Well, there's a lot of different factors that could be in there. So let's start off with the Minnesota Wild, because looking at their current center core, you've got Joel Eriksson Ek and Marco Rossi as your 1-2. And you have Freddie Gaudreau as your third line center. So there's obviously a situation there where you can move some guys around. Like, you could potentially put Ryan Hartman or Marcus Foligno on the second line. You could drop them into the bottom 6. You can move Rossi to the wing. You move Joel Eriksson Ek to the second line. Or if you want Nelson to center that second line, you find a way to make that work. But your top 6 center group would be Nelson and Joel Eriksson Ek. Whether who's the number 1 center, number 2 center, doesn't really matter. I think they're going to do everything they can to really bolster that second line in that type of trade. The Winnipeg Jets are another team that's been kind of in that spotlight as well. And considering how good they've been this season, number 2 in the NHL standings, once again, we've seen that before though. As good as Adam Lowry is, there's been talk about maybe he's, kind of dealing with some injury stuff going on. So it wouldn't be the worst thing to see him. Maybe it would give him less minutes of ice time, which might be good to keep him healthy. But they do have a lot of interesting players there. They've got Scheifele, Velarde, Perfetti, Nemesnikov, Kupari. All those guys can play center. So Nelson could fit there just to help bolster that top 6. But you could definitely see Minnesota, there's a more defined spot for where Nelson could go instead of Winnipeg, where it seems a little bit more it's not as clear exactly where he could go. The New Jersey Devils are really interesting. Obviously, for the fact that the Islanders are in their division, would the Islanders want to trade a guy like Brock Nelson in the division? They could. But what's interesting about this situation, this could be a situation where Nelson maybe, depending on what they want to do here, there's a lot more flexibility here too. You've got the potential, you already have Hughes and Hischier, right? So that's not changing. So then you're looking at a situation where either you move a guy like Nathan Bastian or Stefan Noesen, who's on the first or second line, you put Nelson into the top six on the wing, or do you put him in Paul Cotter's spot on the third line as the third line center, and you're able to split up the time really between those top three centers in Hughes, Hischier, and Brock Nelson, and you have a lot more fluidity down the middle. He's a great penalty killer. He's going to give you depth scoring. That could make a lot of sense for the New Jersey Devils. I could definitely see that. And they do have prospects that the Islanders would be interested in as well. And some of them the Islanders even traded to the New Jersey Devils not too long ago. The Boston Bruins are another one. This one makes a lot of sense too because kind of like Minnesota, they have that weird situation down the middle where you've got Pavel Zacha and Matt Poitras down the middle. As good as those guys are, you like to see a little bit more depth there. Elias Lindholm is currently centering the third line. You do have John Beecher as well. They have a lot of weird pieces in here too, like they claimed Oliver Wahlstrom off waivers from the Islanders, Vinny Lettieri getting some ice time with the Bruins. So there's a lot of interesting pieces on the Bruins. I don't really know where you go with that deal because I think a lot of the Islanders would probably trying to take a look at Matt Poitras, and I don't know if the Bruins would be willing to part ways with that. So that might be difficult for them to get done. And then the Carolina Hurricanes, because the Hurricanes are in on everybody. That is just the way they do things down there in Carolina. We just talked about a potential deal where it almost seems imminent that JT Miller goes to the Hurricanes, which is kind of interesting because you look at that group, they've got a lot of good centers there too. You've got Necas, Kotkaniemi, and Aho that can all play center. You have Seth Jarvis on the wing. He's on the third line right now. That might be because they're just looking to change things up. Who knows, right? That's on any given day. Brendan Moore might do that. But you do have interesting holes in the top six. If you move Jackson Blake or Eric Robinson into the bottom six, you have Seth Jarvis and Brock Nelson in the top six. You're adding another center to that top six, and that's never a bad thing. And I do think the way Brock Nelson plays could fit really nicely with the way that Rod Brendan Moore kind of does things. It's very similar to those old Islander teams, and Nelson found a lot of success and thrived on those teams under Barry Trotz that were very much that defensive lockdown mindset, but also scoring on the opportunities when they're given. Brock Nelson's very good at that as well. Now, there is an issue with Brock Nelson, and it's the fact that he's very, very inconsistent. And when he's on his game, he's going to score a hat trick. He'll have 5 goals in 5 games. But the nights when Brock Nelson's going a month without a goal, and there's the famous saying about, he's been nicknamed Brock and Roll, Mr. Overtime, but he's also known as Brocktober. Brocktober is a saying where he scores all his goals in October, and the rest of the season, he remains dormant. And I obviously feel bad saying that because it's obvious, it is a joke, but there's a lot to back that up. He does very well in the beginning of the season. It seems like, this is the year. Brock Nelson's going to get close to that 40-goal mark this year, and then it just nosedives in November, December, and it just seems like that's it. Like, Brock Nelson fell off the face of the earth again. So it's one of those things where he does score big goals. He'll score big playoff goals, overtime goals. He can do that for your team, but there's a lot of frustrating things with Brock Nelson where you're like, Brock, you got to score that one. And he just gets in those slumps. But with that said, I do think there's a lot of interest in Brock Nelson. A lot of teams, probably even more than this list that Saravelli said, are going to be in on him. Because he is the type of player that, considering this trade market this year, a lot of teams are going for it. They think they can make the playoffs. Even the Islanders, they're 7 points back of a playoff spot. Is it realistic that they jump 7 or 8 teams to get into the playoffs? No. But they still think there's a chance. And that's why if the Islanders are one of the very few teams that decides to be a seller this year, there's a lot less players available, and there's a lot more teams that are interested in your player. So the value of Brock Nelson, where maybe last year or 2 years ago at the deadline, maybe his value wouldn't have been that high because there was a lot of other teams out there giving up similar offers. the Islanders might say to themselves, listen, there's not much of a market out there. Let's create the market with our guys, put guys like Palmieri, put guys like Jean-Gabriel Pageau, guys like Brock Nelson, put them on the market, get them for premium value because everybody's vying for our very few players and getting the most out of what you can. And the Islanders have been going for the playoffs the last couple years, really since Lou Lamoriello got there in 2019, 2020, right? The Islanders have been going for it for the past 5-6 years, and it's been the same old story now, where they continue to just get enough to make the playoffs, and they can't get past the first round. So the days of the Islanders under Barry Trotz going to this Eastern Conference Final, losing Game 7 to Tampa, they had that run, 2 good years, but since then, it's been a lot less impressive, a lot less inspiring, and the Islanders need to make some changes. And I think trading a guy like Brock Nelson, as much as it would hurt, I think it is time for the Islanders to make that move. And I think they're going to be making it fairly soon. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Where do you think Brock Nelson would be a good fit for the New York Islanders? Where do you think the Islanders could get some value from Nelson in return? Let me know your thoughts down below. As always, thank you so much for watching today's video, and I will see you again next time. Peace out, guys.